All right, the question that was posed is, how does rib cage and spine position influence wrist pain and wrist function? So, number one, the rib cage and the thoracic spine are one. They're inseparable. What the rib cage does influences the thoracic spine. What the thoracic spine does influences the rib cage. They cannot operate in isolation of each other. They have to, and if they do, then you have a vertebra that is really out and is extremely painful, more likely, or several vertebrae. That's a whole nother story. So, whenever I move my rib cage, the thoracic spine has to rotate. If I rotate this way, my thoracic spine is rotating that way. If I rotate this way, my thoracic spine is rotating this way. If I compress here, my thoracic spine rounds. If I take a deep breath and go into an extension, then my thoracic spine extends as well. So, the wrist position is important because of what the shoulder position is, because the shoulder hangs off the rib cage, or it should hang off the rib cage, depending upon the proper agonist-antagonist relationship of musculature of the front of the body and the back of the body. So if the ribs position themselves in a position that has dropped down at all, especially in the first 3 to 5 ribs, if there's a compression in the rib cage, then the shoulder position is going to be influenced. Because the shoulder position, as soon as the sternum drops down, it's going to influence the clavicle. And once the clavicle changes its position, then the clavicle is connected to the scapula. And the scapula is influenced by clavicle position. So, once this drops down, then the clavicle drops down. When the clavicle drops down, then it's going to change how the muscles, especially in the flexor orientation of the arm, operate. Also, in the extensor orientation, because when this drops down, it changes the weight distribution of how the arm hangs. If I'm here, my arm is hanging from my scapula. But as soon as I drop down into this position, then my shoulder rounds, and now this contracts basically to hold my arm up rather than just hanging off the rib cage. So you get that contraction all the way through these flexor orientation muscles, right? Or kinetic chain, or coordination, or whatever you want to call it. It changes the position of the radius. This top bone that moves around the ulnar bone, this bone here. So as that shifts and changes, it can pull the radius bone either towards the head, or it can pull it medial or laterally, depending on the humerus position. So once that starts to happen, then it pinches down on the wrist. So you have these two bones, you have the radius and you have the ulna, and they're pinching down here in this area. So now the wrist, that joint, all the joints around it is compressed. And once a joint is compressed, it has a hard time moving. It needs space to move freely. So changing the shoulder position is going to change how these muscles integrate with themselves, because muscles are influenced by joint position. Muscle activation is influenced by joint position. So an example of that is my wrist position is going to influence my bicep. If I change it to here, I get a full contraction of the bicep. But if that goes to here, if my wrist can't go all the way to here like this, I don't get a full contraction of the bicep. So if my shoulders are pulled down into this position, then the clavicle is going to sink more on top of the first and second rib. It's going to cut off arterial flow, venous flow, and nerve conduction to the arm, just from this point. So the whole arm is becoming starved of arterial flow, garbage going out with the venous flow, and nerve conduction. So it's really, really important to have proper rib health to be able to get the shoulders to hang. And the muscles, some of the muscles that are mostly overlooked or improperly trained are the upper trap muscle and the rhomboids. So those muscles are really, really important in relationship to rib position, because their activation is different with different rib positioning. They're the ones that you really want to have enough strength so that your arms can just hang. Otherwise, if the arms aren't hanging from the traps and the rhomboids, they're going to get pulled down. But once they get pulled down, there's more contraction and compression in the rib cage, or vice versa. It doesn't really matter. They go together. So, getting them to be properly strengthened and have the proper tone to be able to resist the strength of the flexor orientation of the pecs, obliques, lats, pec minor. There's a lot of muscles that are going to be pulling down aside from gravity that is pulling the body down. So here's an exercise that you can do to help orient them properly. So make your wrist position like this. Okay? Bring it to your temples here. Make sure you keep the wrists as straight as possible. Do not let them bend or break. Okay? You start here, and then as you bring your elbows back, let your shoulders rise up a little bit. Yes, let the shoulders rise up. There's too much emphasis these days on shoulders down and back. Guess what that does? That hyperextends the spine here, and it actually compresses the ribs here. So now, bring these back like this. Let the shoulders come up and squeeze. Squeeze the shoulder blades together. Now, when you're doing this movement, inhale through the nose, not the mouth. Inhale through the nose. Bring the ribs up. Just let the air out. Do not control the air as you exhale. If you control the air as you exhale, you are contracting the obliques and the intercostals. You're overemphasizing or overcontracting muscles that are already too strong. So, from the side, see how my ribs are coming up, and I'm not going out this way. So, inhale, exhale. Do those movements. Do those movements, and it'll open up the ribs, it'll lift the clavicle, it'll get the upper trap and the rhomboids to integrate properly. One more note, do not let the head come forward. Bring the chin back here like this, and as the shoulders come back up, the head is in this position, not like this. Because you can see, as soon as my head position changes, this drops. So, do this movement 25 times a day, and you'll notice big differences in your wrists and your shoulders and your back. Check you later.